her name was Tamar. You see, Judah is taking the initiative here. He is finding and taking a wife for his son. Now, that's not to say that mothers were not involved, because oftentimes, and clearly in Scripture, they were involved in this process. In fact, in Genesis chapter 27 and verse 46, we see Rebekah concerned about a wife for her son Jacob. So she goes to Isaac and she says, and keep in mind here the context of what she's saying. She's saying that I'm looking around in my culture, I'm looking around here, out here in the land of Canaan at these Canaanite women, and when I think about my son being married to one of these worldly, ungodly Canaanite women, it makes me sick. That's what she's saying. Listen to the language. I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? Do you see her concern there? She's very concerned about a bride for her son. She says, I'm concerned about this, Isaac. So what does Isaac do? Isaac responds to that, and Isaac calls Jacob and blessed him and directed him, you must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. So you see a mother's influence. You see the wife and the mother's influence in this bringing together of a bride and groom very clearly here. In the passage, what to me is one of the classic marriage passages in all of Scripture that was read to you this morning in Genesis chapter 24, we find that Abraham even chose one of his most trusted servants, Eleazar. And he sent Eleazar to find a wife. In other words, he used an agent other than himself. He sent Eleazar as his servant to go out and to search and to find a wife for his son Isaac. Let's look again at the passage. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites. Now, where did you see that? You see that duplication of concern about taking daughters from among the Canaanites? You see, Abraham was concerned about that too. And then we see Rebekah, Abraham's daughter-in-law, is just as concerned when it comes time for Abraham's grandson Jacob to take a wife. So Abraham has this concern. Don't take a wife for my son from among these daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. So it was not uncommon for the parents or the father to send out an agent or a servant on his behalf to search out a bride for his son. So we see, and this is your first bullet point on your handout, that Jewish marriage generally was arranged by the parents. And we're going to see further on here, and if you were careful in listening to the language now, and this is something that we've gotten a lot as we've tried to draw our children back from the dating scene and approach this from a more biblical direction. That's just arranged marriages. But you will notice in the narrative that you heard in Genesis chapter 24, what did Rebekah do when she was asked if she would go and marry this man? She agreed. Her consent was asked and received. So she was a part of this decision. But they were generally arranged by the parents of the bride and groom, typically at the initiation of the father of the groom. By choosing the bride, the father would choose the bride for the groom. And it was not uncommon for the groom's family to employ a servant or a trusted agent that would go out on their behalf and seek a wife. There's some wonderful, wonderful parallels between Eleazar in the Old Testament and something that we're going to see about how Christ's bride is drawn to him in the New Testament. And if you'll notice, you'll pick up a lot of these things as we go through here. Now, once a bride had been decided upon, there was this issue of the mohar in the Hebrew, the mohar, or the bride price or the ransom price. In fact, again, we see this very clearly in Genesis chapter 34, and this is where Shechem wanted to marry Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and he comes to Jacob and he understands the marriage customs that he must adhere to, because he says in Genesis chapter 34 and verse 12, he says, "Ask for me." Shechem is wanting to marry Jacob's daughter, so he comes to Jacob and he says, "Ask for me. Ask me for as great a bride price," that's the Hebrew word mohar there, "and gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife." This mohar, this bride price, was typically paid by the groom and his father. And it was paid to the father of the bride. You recall in 24th chapter of Genesis, it was read this morning. What did the servant Eleazar do when they agreed for Rebekah to go back with him? What did he do? He gave them many precious things. He gave these precious things to Laban, who was obviously standing in for Rebekah's father, who had no doubt died at this time. Eleazar gives these precious things as a bride price, or a ransom price, if you will, so that Rebekah can be the bride of young Isaac. We also know from Genesis chapter 29 that Jacob himself labored for the hand of, I always get Rachel and Rebekah turned around here, but he labored for the hand of Rachel. For how many years? 7 years. He served his father-in-law for 7 years to receive the hand of his bride in marriage. He paid a tremendous bride price. This bride price was required by law. The gift of this bride price also not only established a bond, not only did it create goodwill between the families or some kind of sense of obligation, but it was actually, this bride price was in a sense conveying something of the life of the giver to the recipient. It was communicating a union was taking place. And from this point of view, this gift serves to establish something that is comparable to a blood covenant. A blood covenant between the giver and the recipient. And in the giving of this bride price, this ransom price, if you will, the two families and the bride and groom were bound together in a very intimate union. Usually the bride price was quite high. Usually it was high to demonstrate the great value of the bride. So we see here that a bride price or a ransom, here's your next bullet point. The bride price or the ransom price was paid to the father of the bride by the groom and his father. This payment was established. This payment actually established something very much akin to a blood covenant between the giver and the recipient. It was an entering into a covenant relationship that was very intimate and very close. That was very much signified in this bride price. But in addition to the gift of the bride price, in ancient Jewish custom, there was the matan, or the giving of love gifts. Now you recall in the passage we looked at just a moment ago that Shechem says to Jacob, ask me for a great bride price and gift. Now, the word gift there is matan in